Hello and welcome to another episode of DCU Daily, and today we're talking about the Elseworlds label, the black label, if you will, of the new DC at DC Studios that James Gunn and Peter Safran have basically designated as every. It seems like everything that's not part of the DCU is gonna exist as a as a black label sort of a project that is gonna get categorized under DC Elseworlds. And to that end, we've of course already gotten Joker, and we're about to get Joker Folie à Deux, and Batman. The Batman was considered, and will be moving forward considered an Elseworlds franchise, and the Batman Part Two is, as of now, scheduled to come out in October 2025. They've got the Penguin series that you would also consider part of the Elseworlds brand. Probably the first project to hit the airwaves with that label attached, because the Batman and Joker, Elseworlds wasn't officially a thing when they came out. We have also heard that Teen Titans Go is going to be considered moving forward, something in that same vein of Elseworlds, and then of course Superman and Lois, which is wrapping up its final season. That's also considered to be a part of the Elseworlds. There are other projects potentially in the works. There's rumored projects. There's projects like that J.J. Abrams Superman movie that is still in development somewhere along the way, and that would also be considered part of the Elseworlds. But there are some questions around, like what their approach is with this. Like, do they have a cohesive vision for what the Elseworld stories will be, or is it just a matter of a creator like a Steven Spielberg comes over and says, you know what, I finally will make that Blackhawk movie, and James Gunn just says, well, we don't really know how to make that work in the DCU, so we'll slap the Elseworlds branding on it. So we're going to discuss that all and so much more, and then of course we're probably going to get into some of ideas for uh, comic book stories that could be adapted into standalone projects that would be perfect for the Elseworlds label. So to do that and so much more, of course, as always, I've got with me John. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Elseworld stories are certainly interesting to talk about because there's just so much. It's literally the possibilities are endless. And I feel like if you really take advantage of that, you can definitely have something special here. Now, obviously, the projects we do have under Elseworlds is, Matt Reeves' Batman universe, Todd Phillips' Joker universe, as well as some other films and TV series, Superman and Lois, Teen Titans Go, the recent animated Batman film with Merry Little Batman. A lot of that has been Elseworlds, but I feel like the Elseworlds label is something that I feel Gunn and Safran really need to take advantage of because, again, if you bring in sort of those ideas to get like non-comic book fans, like, oh, I'm not really interested in like Batman, Superman. Sure, you have the variety of the DCU, which we have talked about endlessly before. How like bringing in that variety would help combat superhero fatigue, as well as bringing in fans of stuff that who people who aren't quote unquote superhero fans, bringing them into the fold. Like, I don't really want to see a Superman movie, but they might be interested in a Swamp Thing movie. I don't really want to see another Batman movie, but I'm curious about this authority thing. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like The Boys. So I'm like, yeah, let me, get that. So I feel like the variety is there. But the thing is, if that's not enough, then take advantage of DC Elseworlds. Obviously, you don't have to plan like a million projects, but what you can do is, like, really get, like, filmmakers who have wanted to do something like I know Matthew Vaughn recently mentioned that he wants to do a Red Sun movie with Henry Cavill, and that could be interesting because he had a really good plan for the Superman trilogy back when Man of Steel was getting developed, and he had a really good idea with
Yeah.
Mark Millar. So,
Dude, but they can't do that for some time until David Cornsweet is firmly established,
yeah.
because no matter
So,
when they do it, they'll always have comparisons, and of course looking back at, oh, it's Henry Cavill coming back to play but
exactly.
I would be
So
all for it though, like completely for it.
yeah, like, I think they could really, take advantage of the DC Elseworlds label, and I do have a few ideas of some adaptations and some concepts that I think they could really do, And the first one I have is was an Elseworld story from the it was collected in it was two stories collected in one edition, one from the late 90s, one from the early 2000s, and I think they made another one that was not as well known. It's called JSA: The Liberty Files. Now, the basic gist of this story is that it is a very again, it kind of follows into that realistic take of it's essentially a world war it's takes the JSA members, various JSA members, like Batman, Hourman, and eventually like Sandman and Jay Garrick's The Flash and all that, and makes them government sanctioned covert operatives in during World War II. Now, I think the way they could make that work is like I feel like the easiest way to get people on board for anything in terms of variety in superhero projects, make it a period piece. Like that is like I feel like the easiest thing to do. Like
Well, I
the
mean, the
first
DCEU's most critically acclaimed project was Wonder Woman, World War One,
exactly. Like I feel like because you have Wonder Woman, which was World War One, you had First Avenger for Marvel with Captain
World War
America in
Two.
World War
Yep.
II. Because usually it takes place in
I mean,
the
even the X-Men: The Last
present,
Stand, the Cuban Missile Crisis, not The Last Stand, the
first class.
X-Men: The First Class was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Also
That's what
Matthew
they
Vaughn.
faced.
So, yeah, like, making
Yeah.
them period pieces, it spices things up, it makes it interesting, and bending it around world events makes it interesting, and the fact that it always takes place in the present can get a little bit tiresome after a while. Not totally bad, but a little bit tiresome, and that's what we were talking about, the other day with, the Fantastic Four film, taking place in the '60s. Like, that would, bring some zhuzh into like what Marvel is the Marvel slump right now. And
Mhm.
I feel like Liberty Files is a really good way of doing that because a reviewer even said that like this book might even bring fans that who aren't well versed in DC into this world, like gives them a rough idea and makes them interested. And I feel like that's just a really great idea because it kinda goes back to, like, the 2 most well-reviewed Batman movies of all time are The Batman and The Dark Knight, which take a more, quote, unquote, "realistic" stance on Batman. Now, I know a lot of people are kinda sick of the realistic Batman feel, but if we're going for a realistic World War II thriller period piece, I think you could definitely bring a lot into that, especially when you have the original Liberty File story, and then you have the sequel, The Unholy Three. And it brings in like the idea of the Superman and other characters like I think Red Tornado is another one, and all these characters. And I just feel like that's a really cool way to go. And just the World War II Justice Society, which is on the screen right now, that was a really cool way of doing it. That was definitely that was a really good story, and I feel like you can get a lot of people, like, into that. People are who are into period pieces, so
I mean, can you
that's
imagine, like, if they did a Justice Society movie that felt like The Hunt for Red October?
yeah,
Like,
that would be so
that's
awesome.
right?
Like,
Like,
it
it's
would just be great.
yeah.
Like, I would wanna see that. Like, there was another one I was gonna bring up, like, Golden Age, The Golden Age, which is deals with Golden Age superheroes dealing with McCarthyism, but it's for superheroes instead of communism. That was also a really cool story you could do.
I mean,
But the
you're really
other
now setting my imagination off, just as a
exactly.
side note,
Like
because I feel like and just also thinking about it from James Gunn's perspective, because he probably looks at it and says, "Okay, so what can we do different in 2024 onwards for superhero movies that hasn't been done in the past 20 plus years when the genre has been dominating, especially the past 10, 15 years, like all of Hollywood and the cultural zeitgeist." And I think that that's where you can go with this, where you can use the possibilities that they haven't really explored, because even though have superhero movies have gone into so many genres and done a lot of genre melds, what they haven't really done is they've kind of veered away from what a lot of hard sci-fi tends to do well, which is serve as a metaphor to socio-political and macroeconomical, like,
yeah.
issues and trends, and really tackles it. And I think period pieces allow you to do it in a way which kind of create it creates a certain distance, whether it's in the period far in the future or in the past, like sci-fi tends to usually be one or the other. And you add super powered beings into the mix, it does, create new opportunities that we just haven't seen enough of. And like you said, the examples we have gone have always, more often than not hit the mark. Like if
Yeah,
they've been some of the best
exactly.
reviewed, projects that they have seen in the past decade and a half.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, and it just, really opens the floodgates in terms of anything. Like, I mean, the first DC Elseworld story of all time was period piece Batman with Gotham by Gaslight, and that was eventually adapted into an animated movie, and that was really good. So I feel like you can do just so much with that concept. And Liberty File, I think, is like a good like point. Like, get someone who does like period pieces really well.
It's
Um,
like Steven Spielberg maybe.
Yeah, even then,
That's his
I think he wants his
wheelhouse.
Blackhawk movie first, but I
That's
wouldn't
fair.
mind either, but,
Yeah.
Liberty Files, I think, would be a good adaptation to do, and then speaking of period pieces, my other really, really big favorite for an out like, specifically an adaptation, I wouldn't mind if James Gunn's DCU took inspiration from this, but I think this is one that would definitely take advantage of a proper adaptation, and that is DC: The New Frontier. It is arguably my favorite comic book story of all time. Now, this received a really good adaptation. This was like one of the first like DC animated movies, and great movie. But the biggest problem I have with that is that it's a little bit more than an hour long. Look how big this damn book is.
That's
That
a
is that
thick
is
comic
huge.
book.
That is a
Like,
huge book, and it only got a
yes.
meanwhile, uh, Superman Red Sun is like an eighth the size of this, and that got an hour and a half, and that barely followed the original story, so
Yeah.
I would say make this like a big duology and like heavily have it as like the silver age, like I because that's what this book does. Like it mixes like the visceral crime pulpy adventures of the golden age of like heroes like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and various Justice Society members, kind of following into that McCarthyism where they were forced to, go into hiding or else their identities would be exposed and that kind of thing. With the introduction of the Silver Age, like with heroes like the heavy sci-fi movies at the time with the 50s of like is the atomic age, heavy on science fiction, all that like with heroes like Green Lantern, Adam Strange, Barry Allen's The Flash, all of that. So I feel like this mixes in those ideas spectacularly and it mixes in so many different genres perfectly. And it's a big book. So I feel like I know trilogies are the big thing now, but a duology of DC The New Frontier would be
What about
excellent.
a what about a TV show? Because I feel like there's enough there, right? Like, because I feel like they've made
You
TV
could.
shows from, like, lesser source material than this.
You
Like,
could. It is I would say a mini series. I don't know if there's enough for because I wouldn't want like extra like stories made out of this that just wouldn't be as good as the original comic. Um, but I feel like it needs like the big budget treatment. I feel like to really have that like sort of like
I mean, you
epic
can get that
scale.
on streaming now, right? Like, what if like
Um,
HBO Max says, okay, or like, Casey
yeah,
Bloys and his team is like, you know what? We're gonna give this thing the Game of Thrones treatment in terms of the money we throw at it, and James Gunn, because they are working together on a number of projects already, like the Penguin.
yeah,
What if this thing was to become? Let's even suppose if it was a miniseries, right? Let's say they make it a 10 episode miniseries, but each episode has a budget of like $30 million, and then you go
that could
cast
possibly work.
like big time act, because the one thing that I would be, because here's a counterpoint to what you're saying, because agree with you 100%. This project I would love to see realized in live action somehow. But the one thing that would concern me is there's a lot of characters in this that will have other versions in the mainline DCU, and you'll probably also have some version of the Justice League or Justice Society in the mainline DCU. So there would be a lot of overlap potentially, and I think this is the kind of project that fans might like. What you don't wanna do is you don't wanna create competition for yourself, you don't wanna, like, undercut your own stuff, and I
Right.
think that's something that they're being very careful about. I think when we see the casting for the Batman Brave and the Bold, we will see that they're I mean, and obviously just the fact that they're gonna bring in Damian Wayne and the Bat family alone sets it apart from the Batman, and they've tried to, like, differentiate that as much as possible, and they should, and they have to, because otherwise you'll just, you're kind of undercutting your own work. So to that end, if they were to make this a movie, I mean, I think that they'll probably try to stretch it to multiple movies because otherwise it'd be really one long movie. And if you were to do it one movie, you gotta imagine like it's one thing to make it an animated form where you just bring the people just look at the characters. That's what they're there for. But when you make it like a feature film as a from a producer, like if with Peter Safran and James Gunn, if they put their producers hats on and think about it, would it make sense to make it a $200 million movie where you bring in A-list stars for a one-off adventure? Granted, that is how Hollywood movies, have been made for ages. That not everything needs to have a sequel or does have a sequel, but I mean, do you think they're gonna take that kind of a risk? And then even because, for example, right now the only things we have really to compare it to that are considered Elseworlds projects are all like kind of franchises. They're not really one-offs. We haven't really seen a
Right.
a one-off in the Elseworlds yet. So like, what do you think about that? Do you think they'd be better off making into more of a long form storytelling, like what a TV show or a mini series would provide, or do you think they what would it work, or would it undercut the mainline DCU if it became a single movie or maybe a trilogy of movies?
Yeah, I think one shots would definitely, help prop it up a little bit as more of like a label rather than, something to kind of just I wouldn't even say a label, but like something more than a label. Like what would be like considered like its own franchise. Like DC Elseworlds is its own franchise instead of just slapping something like, oh, Teen Titans Go, it's not mainline DCU, slap Elseworlds on it, and there you go. It's
Yeah.
technically different continuity.
It doesn't just become an if-then
Yeah.
statement, like right,
Yeah,
right.
it's like I would say like really take advantage of its own franchise. And I think, Liberty File and DC The New Frontier would do that. I think James Gunn mentioned this like way back when, is that one of his like inspirations for the DCU was this, and that it was kind of, like the first major Justice League movie was gonna be something like this, or it was gonna be Endgame. I forget what it was specifically, but it's like this. But the thing is, this has to work as a period piece in the 50s because it's the bridge between the golden age and the introduction of the silver age, and it's sort of like the best it's almost like an idyllic version of Watchmen in a way, where it's sort of like it has like that real world influence, but it's instead of like the visceral human story of the human condition like Watchmen was, with some fantastical elements here and there. This is more about like the fantastical aspects of like the idealist like 50s, but also dealing with some darker themes of the past of like World War II and like the space race and all of that as well.
It's
So,
almost like you're talking about For All Mankind, which is like an alternate history show that
yeah, like
does
kind
get
of in a
dark,
way.
but it's generally got a like, it's almost like
Boom.
Star Trek from the '80s, like, it's got a
Get Ronald D. Moore to do the miniseries. Boom, there you
that would
go.
be perfect, wouldn't it? Yeah,
Um,
I would be like, "Okay, you know what? As soon as you attached Ronald D. Moore's name to any project, I'm 100% like bought in."
oh
Like, I
yeah,
would
definitely.
immediately. Yeah.
But even then, like, okay, so I kind of understand, like, maybe James Gunn's like, oh, okay, well, almost all the projects under Elseworlds are like more so not adaptations, but like sort of like almost like what if stories, like, oh, what if like you know we had a movie about the Joker? What if we had like this gothic, realistic take on Batman, that kind of thing. I understand, like, oh, instead of doing straight up adaptations, which I would love to see and I would want to see most definitely, I understand if they want to go for more concepts, more something that could really bring in those those non-comic book fans. And well, I think Liberty Files and New Frontier could definitely do that. I understand having more of like a vague concept could bring those people in, like Joker. Like Joker, sure, it was kind of sort of an adaptation of the Killing Joke, but, like, not really. It just brought in, like, that concept of, like,
Mhm.
oh, he was a failed comedian
Yeah.
and but it did its own thing. I like, there are some concepts I think could be really good. For instance, like, have, like, a very dark drama on, like, the duality and the dichotomy of being a hero with a secret identity. And I think a really good way to do that is have a Batman movie that is not about Batman, but it's about, like, the inciting incident of the movie is that Batman is found out that he is Bruce Wayne. That is the inciting incident of the film, and the rest of the movie, it doesn't have him suiting up as Batman. Maybe you could, like, maybe in a couple scenes here or there,
That would be
but
hard
it
to sell though,
but
because
it
people
yeah,
are gonna
that's
wanna see Batman.
very, very hard sell. Maybe you
Yeah.
could have him suit up a couple times, obviously, but it deals with, like, kinda like what Iron Man 3 tried to do and kinda failed at,
Yeah.
but, like, more so dealing with the fallout of people realizing Bruce Wayne and Batman are one and the same. Like, you could bring in, like, aspects of, like, cancel culture, you could bring in aspects of, like, Batman being the true identity of Bruce Wayne, and the fact that people now know that he is one and the same. How does he deal with that as this character who's, like, almost pretended his entire life that he was Bruce Wayne? Now people believe that, oh, he's not really Bruce Wayne, he's just and it's like you have, like, way like, so many different directions you could take this, like, maybe even have, like, him breaking down and sort of, like, I don't wanna say going insane, but, like, sort of, like, just, like, having, like, this newfound weight on his shoulders, like, having it be almost like a drama of, like, him like, this happens to him, this happens to Bruce, and he's like, "What do I do now? What do I have to what do I have to do to, like, what can I do?" And I would say you could have other heroes, maybe, like, more grounded heroes, but I think you'd, like, stick with, like, maybe just Batman and just, like, have Bruce Wayne deal with his identity being released. You could even call it, like, Batman Identity, like, him just,
I
like
would even just call it Bruce Wayne or something
yeah,
like
like,
that,
even
like,
just
so
like
you're not
that,
'cause if you put Batman in the title, people wanna see Batman, and if
yeah.
you're not gonna give him
I
a
would
lot of
say, like,
Batman
the fall of Bruce Wayne or something like that, and I
the
feel
or
like
oh, the what was it? There was a House of Gu not the House of Gucci, there was a fall of the House of was it the House of Usher?
yeah,
What's
fall of the
the one
House
of
of Usher, fall of the House of Wayne, I
Wayne?
guess.
Yeah, that could
Um,
because you kinda
but
get, like
yeah,
you're, like, going for this prestige title, and then you give it that treatment, yeah.
like, really go, like, highbrow with it, like, oh,
But
like,
it's not a
proper, like
tongue-in-cheek thing, you
no, like
earnestly commit
yeah,
to the
earnestly,
bit.
like, treat it like this is, like, a proper, like, character movie of
It's a character drama,
Batman,
yeah.
of yeah, a character drama of Bruce Wayne having and then because the thing is I would want them to focus on, which some of the movies have focused on, of Bruce Wayne being the mask and Batman being the true identity, and now what does that bring up for the entire world now? Do they believe that? What does he think what does Bruce Wayne think to, like, how do I deal with that, and do I now have to treat Bruce Wayne as the true identity because I have no choice? Do I retire as Batman? Do I become something new? Like, what do I do? You can even bring up, like, the very idiotic argument of people who don't get the character of being like, oh, Batman just beats up the mentally ill, which is such a dumb take, very superficial, very idiotic in my eyes. And the people who say that just don't understand Batman as a character. And I feel like you could use that as sort of like the idiots that are like, oh, he never Bruce Wayne never did anything for Gotham. He just beat up these villains. And then obviously you have like the more personal attack of like villains attacking Bruce Wayne's identity. And it's like that whole thing, because there's also, like, the joke from the Harley Quinn show where he's like, "Bruce Wayne is Batman? Like, this pretty boy, playboy? Where's my electric car, Bruce?" Like, all that, like, obviously, not have like the jokey part, but like really this guy, this playboy douchebag was like the most intimidating, and he can lose that intimidation factor. Well, how can this guy be intimidating? He's this wimpy playboy, and you have like all these sort of different things you can do with that, and I feel like doing that could definitely be like a really cool concept for a movie. And then the last one I wanted to talk about very briefly, because there's not a like it's just like a blanket thing that like anybody could do. I know in this day and age that a lot of people are just kind of sick of the evil Superman trope.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you have Injustice, The Boys, Omni Man, and like you have all this stuff. I think it would be really funny to have a satirical film based around the idea of evil Superman and making fun of it. Like you have like this guy, maybe he's given these powers, and instead of doing good, he does bad. But like no matter how much bad he tries to do, he just ends up doing good instead. Like there was this really funny old sketch by the user ProZD where it's like a villain who tries to do bad things, but he ends up doing good things instead. And I real like poking fun at the whole idea of an evil Superman that like no matter what you do, the good person in everybody will reign supreme. And you can even have the joke of like, oh, he was given these powers by this evil corporation that wanted him to be a bad guy. And like he's there even when he then like tries to do good, because throughout the movie he's seen doing good, so he tries to be a good guy. You could have the evil corporation, which would be a representation of DC pushing the evil Superman thing, and be like, no, 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 he's a bad guy. No, 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 we gotta have him be a bad guy because of this reason, this. And then there's like the real life pushback and all that. So I think that would be a really fun concept to like deal with, of like just like the idea of like just completely shitting on the idea of evil Superman, since everyone's kind of done with it at this point. And like as well as making fun of the people who are like, oh, the only and like evil Superman is the only way to make Superman relatable, and it's like the only way to make Superman interesting, and like all that nonsense, as well as maybe bring in the idea of another concept I'm sick of, Harley Quinn in general, like making fun of her as a character, how she's like, even though she's a terrorist, she's like still somehow a role model to people. And you could bring that aspect in as well, just making fun of like the various tropes that DC is pushing on everyone, even though nobody wants to see that anymore. I feel like bringing that like sort of like a satirical, maybe action comedy, I think you could do like a lot of fun with that. And yeah, I think those concepts and stories could work for a for the DC Elseworlds label, because I think that would just be overall very fun and really take advantage of the label of DC Elseworlds, instead of just slapping various projects. Oh, this doesn't take place in the DCU, so whatever. But take advantage of the Elseworld and just
Right.
create stories around that. Hell, even you can do even bring in aspects into the DCU of Elseworld Stories, because I remember I think there was another thing where it was, bringing in Kingdom Come, like as obviously, just like DC New Frontier, I have my deluxe copy of Kingdom Come. I remember James Gunn said, or it was a rumor, I don't know, again, grain of salt, that they wanted to do that. He wanted this to be the end game. I don't know if you can make that work. Like he wanted this to be like the final film of the DCU. Again, could be BS. He could have said it. I'm not totally sure, but that could be an interesting concept. I'm not sure if you can make that work. I would love to see this either or, because Kingdom Come is easily the greatest Justice League story of all time, even though I majorly love DC The New Frontier, because this isn't a Justice League story, this is a DC story. There's a difference. Or like, people are kind of missing, Stan Lee, and I feel like it would be really funny to bring in his iterations on the DC universe. A lot of these stories are not very good. They're very ridiculous, very Stan Lee. Whether that's good or bad depends on the person. I think it would be funny to bring in these aspects and like kind of maybe make fun of them, maybe not. I don't know. Since he's no longer with us, it might be in bad taste to make fun of it. But like, I don't know. I think you can make this kind of work as an Elseworld story, or like bring in certain aspects to like
Yeah, I mean, it would be probably with
make it
his
fun.
estate's blessing, like, whatever they do, like, if
Right.
they were to get Stanley's, version. Because yeah,
Most
I think
definitely.
it would also probably be like a actually, you that would be probably the most logical and the closest thing we might get in our lifetimes to a Marvel DC collaboration.
Yeah. I mean, James
Not
Gunn
that
has said he
Stan Lee,
wants
the
to do it.
person. Right, like, because not that Stanley the person was like, uh, was like all Marvel, because like he moved around. He did do like he came over to DC, like you said, what you just showed. But I think that could be a good opportunity to potentially do like
Oh
a
yeah, most
collaboration
definitely.
opportunity. And if
That
it's
could
set
be
in
fun.
this like alternate, like if it's own thing, then it doesn't have to be in the MCU or the DCU, just his own thing. It's just sort of like
Exactly.
a tribute piece, which is also could be opportunities to make it all kinds of meta would be
Oh
great.
yeah, easily. I think it
Yeah.
could be very fun. And then the final story I wanted to mention that could be an adaptation, but I think this is a story um that the DCU should use as inspiration. We've noticed more and more that it seems like James Gunn is being inspired by post-crisis in terms of a comic book side, because there's a lot of references towards Justice League International, how the Authority might seem like the precursor to the Justice League, how I know that a cast member was talking about being in the movie. Now he's no longer in the movie. That character that he was going to play was a villain of Justice League International, and he has Guy Gardner who was in Justice League. We're getting a Booster Gold show. We're getting Jaime Reyes's Blue Beetle from Joe Lamar Duena, even though Ted Cord was in Justice League International, and all this other stuff.
Ted Cord is in, well, if you haven't seen Blue Beetle, spoiler alert, Ted Cord is
He
apparently
does
alive.
kind of show up,
So,
but yeah, like it's
well, we hear
iffy.
his voice, but yes, yeah.
So I think this is a story. This is my favorite Justice League story of all time. It's kind of underrated because it kind of gets overshadowed by Kingdom Come because the art of this is Alex Ross, but Justice. This is the perfect Justice League story because it just gets everything right. The villains are right, the characterizations are right. Obviously, Alex Ross. The art is beautiful. If James Gunn plans to do a Justice League movie in the future, which he probably wants to separate between, as much, the DCEU Justice League, which got a lot of, iffiness because you had the Snyder cut, which a lot of people were campaigning for, and then the theatrical cut, which was not very good. So I understand if there's distance. If you want to do a Justice League movie, adapt this because again, it kind of goes for what James Gunn wants to do. He wants like that post-crisis vibe of like kind of darker stories, which would be the 90s essentially. A lot of death of Superman, Bruce Wayne is no longer Batman, Hal Jordan becomes Parallax kind of thing. But if you want to bring in more of that Silver Age influence, which I understand a lot of people don't like the Silver Age because it's very silly, but what Justice manages to do so perfectly, it intertwines the like what this book does is that it intertwines the Silver Age silliness, but it gives it a darker edge and there's no like satire or meta commentary. It plays it straight. Because the inciting incident of this story is that all the villains get a premonition that the world is going to end and the Justice League are destroyed. Like there's a premonition of that, and then the villains start to do good because they want to save the world now because they want to survive. So it's like, what's up with this premonition? Why are these villains acting good? Why is preconceived notions of the Justice League deteriorating? There's all that in this story, and um it brings in so many aspects that can be done well if you simply adapt this either as an Elseworld story, which I wouldn't mind seeing, like going full on in the Silver Age aspects, or using it as heavy inspiration for a Justice League film. I think that would be the way to go because I love this story so much. it just gets everything right, and it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's so layered, it's so fantastic. If you love Kingdom Come, if you love Alex Ross's work, if you love DC, if you love the Justice League, please get your hands on this book and read it. Hell, go pirate it if you need to. You gotta read the story because it is so amazing. So amazing. Definitely one of the most underrated Justice League stories of all time. Please, for the love of God, read this. And I think a good way to really spark that DCU, either Elseworlds or Mainline, would be to use this as inspiration basis for a Justice League film or its own thing. Anything can work. Use it because it's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Absolutely. I
Enough
think the
fanboying for me for now, please.
no, this is a great recommendation because of course if you're looking to get inspiration, that's a great place to start. And James Gunn obviously is already aware of that and probably already is drawing the inspiration from it. And if you look at the artwork, I mean, yeah, like you said, it's just brilliant. It does a brilliant job of bringing different eras together. Like you said, playing it straight, which allows them to kind of still bring some crazy characters like Plastic Man into the fold and still make it work. And yeah, I think all the ideas that you have suggested here, and there's more out there. If you have any other Elseworld stories you'd like to have featured, you can always drop your comments down below because I think there's an infinitude of possibilities. That's what Elseworlds should be. Is it should be just like you said, not just slapping that label on anything that's not part of the DCU, but is a DC related property, but they should truly take advantage of let's I think what makes Joker and the Batman so good is because they are like very well put together alternative takes on these characters that you wouldn't be able to make work in a larger universe where everything has to kind of fit together, but they work well as standalones. And then I think when you can start there and then eventually grow out to doing something bigger like a Justice, where you are bringing a lot of DC characters together but they're kind of in their own universe, and then you kind of create those Crisis and Infinite Earth potential as well because you can cross things over, and rather than making it a nostalgia bait, you can actually cross it over something that also it kind of exists in parallel with the mainline DCU. Of course, they would have to make sure it doesn't, you're not competing against yourself. So
Exactly.
yeah, that's the key. But yeah, guys, let us know in the comments. What do you think about this? There's so many good ideas, so many stories. John, you just pitched. Were if you joined the show late, if you're watching it live, if you're watching it, later on, and you missed any of these, there's some brilliant recommendations, and we'll try to get some of those in the comments, of some of those in the description down below. But and if you have any suggestions, guys, if you're watching this and you're like, you know what, this other story would also make for a great adaptation. Why didn't you talk about that? Then let us know in the comments, and we'll try to bring it up next time. There's so many options. We're probably gonna miss a few things, but we will revisit this topic, I'm sure, in the future once we have maybe a few more Elseworlds projects announced, and then we're like, well, what else is left on the board? Let's add some more ideas to the list. And until then, it's been great talking to you, John, as always. Of course, like and subscribe, guys. That helps us out with the algorithm. And if you disliked it, what we were talking about, if you feel like these are terrible ideas, you can hit the dislike button as well, and leave us your feedback. And until next time, do go out there, watch something DC related, come back and talk to us about it. We love to hear from you. And until next time on DCU Daily, it's been another great few minutes of discussing the story possibilities that I think are some of the best in all of comic book fandom that DC has to offer. So I'm looking forward to doing it more and more in the future. So thanks, John, and we'll
Oh,
see
of
you next
course.
time.